All right, so since 320s are all the rage right now, I'm going to try to do some of the tests. One thing that I've noticed, so I think it's Wyoming Gun Project, he did the M17, but he didn't do anything with the safety on. So we can assume, I don't know all the details, but I think it's a fair assumption that the airman that passed away, that his 320 would have been holstered. It was, well, we think it was holstered, but we can assume that it was probably had the manual thumb safety on as well. So I wanted to see if there's a manual release of the striker, so bad engagement or whatever, and it slips, could that the striker safety somehow have not worked with the thumb safety on. So let's try it. Primed case, and like I said, we're going to do the manual disconnect. The first thing I'm just going to do, I think the FBI test, basically they just kind of moved it around up and down, did some stuff to it, manipulate it like it's in the holster, and then they did a manual release of the striker. So let's try that. If I can get it in there. All right, so they're good there. Now we're gonna try to do this. Try to do it without popping that case out, but we're gonna try that a couple more times. So thumb safety's on. You can see on. Manipulate it a little bit, and then manual release. Okay, it's good. Let's see. You can see like a very small indentation, but that's not abnormal. And then we'll try that one more time. Thumb safety on. Just doing some manipulations up and down. And let's try that one more time. Okay, so it didn't do that. The other thing I wanted to try was, if you watch Wyoming Gun Project's videos, he basically brings the trigger to that wall, locks it in that place, and then releases it. What I want to try is thumb safety on, pressure on the trigger. So thumb safety is on. And I want to see if I put pressure on that trigger with the thumb safety on, if that is enough pressure on the trigger. And again, thumb off, and now it's on. So thumb safety on. I'm going to put pressure on the trigger with that thumb safety on. Okay, that's good. And I did test this with the pencil, and a couple of the times it wasn't consistent. The pencil trick, it did break through, so, or it did pop the pencil out a little bit. Not as with much force without the thumb safety, but anyway, so thumb safety on, pressure on the trigger, and manual disconnect or manual release of the striker if I can get it. And that one actually broke my finger free, or the trigger free, which is not always common. It doesn't always do that, I should say. And we'll do that a couple more times. Thumb safety on, pressure on the trigger, manual release of the striker. Didn't do it. And then I think I'm gonna try that one more time. So manual, or pressure on the trigger, thumb safety on, and then manual release of the striker. Okay, so I didn't do it. Slight indentation, but nothing to be concerned about. Mine does not do the, it doesn't have the issue where I bring the trigger back and then put pressure on the front or back. So on this one at least, and then I have the X10 with the agency trigger, which will be the, I'm gonna do another test on that one as well, or similar test. And then one more time, pressure on the trigger, thumb safety on, and manual release of the striker. Okay. And then this one's going to be, I'm just going to go to that wall, not past the wall, just to the wall, so you can see. Okay, so that was not past the wall. I've seen some people say like, oh, it's a millimeter past the wall. And that's with the other test where it's basically, this does not have a lot of play. But what it shows is that when you hit the wall, not past the wall, so when you just take up the slack, just taking up that slack disengages the striker safety. Now, is that the end of the world? Not necessarily. It's not ideal. The problem, I think, can be is if something is grabbing that trigger and bringing it to the wall, and then the striker and the sear have bad engagement, and then it slips off. That would still have to include something else that's causing that. I know Wyoming Gun Project, he was saying like maybe build up in carbon stuff. Maybe that could happen. I don't know. Clearly there is some kind of issue, and this is something that I've kind of talked to people about, and I hear online and stuff, well, the Glocks had issues at the beginning. So the early issues with the Glock, and you talk about Glock leg and all that stuff, there was a couple different issues. One, and in my opinion, both of them are training issues. The first one was people were having accidental discharges or NDs or whatever you want to call them. They were having ADs when they were disassembling, because you have to, on a Glock, you have to pull the trigger to disassemble. People weren't properly clearing it. That was a training issue. Is it the best design that you have to pull the trigger to disassemble the gun? Not necessarily, but it still is something you can train around. The other issue was, this was in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s, a lot of police agencies were going from double action revolvers or even double action, single action semi-autos. And so they were training guys to prep their trigger. I mean, there's old training videos that you can find that people are, as they're clearing rooms, they're prepping that double action trigger. So if you actually have to engage, you're basically staging it or prepping it to the single action position, and then you're just following through if you have to make engagement. So guys that had years on double action guns were going to Glocks, and they were prepping the trigger when they shouldn't have been, and they were firing them. So I'm not saying there's no issues with Glocks. I prefer Glocks, but I'm not necessarily a fanboy. Any company, if I feel like it is, or any gun, any product at that, any product whatsoever, if I think it's failing its customer base, it's putting lives in danger, then all loyalty, they don't have loyalty to me. Why would I have loyalty to them? So that's just something to think about. If there is an issue, and I'm not saying there is an issue, it definitely seems like there is something wrong with a gun. And the scariest issue with any product, especially with a gun, is the one that you can't easily diagnose. That seems to be the problem, is with all these testing, guns are going off in people's holsters uncommanded. That's a fact. You're seeing it. There's numerous videos. I don't care what anybody says. Their guns are going off in holsters when there's no manipulation of them. Not all the ones are like that, but there are cases of that. There's several cases of that. So there is something issue. I tend to lean towards a tolerance stacking of sorts. So you're outsourcing parts, and you're putting all those parts together, and maybe bad sear engagement, bad the trigger or the striker safety is not very substantial. So maybe something is messing with that, and then maybe it's I wish I could remember his name so I could give him a shout out, but there was one video I watched where he's talking about it could actually, the engagement could create a burr that when it actually has an uncommanded discharge, it removes that burr so you can't identify it. So there's something there, something to think about. I was just curious about the thumb safety, because that's something I was thinking about. I'm like, okay, this airman, God rest his soul, seriously, that's terrible. How, if and maybe the manual safety wasn't engaged, maybe it was an issue that we haven't thought about. But if that thumb safety is engaged, how is it bypassing the striker safety, because we're seeing that with minimal input on the trigger, it disengages that, but you can't do it with the thumb safety on. So just something to think about. I'll do another video because this one's getting long. I'll do another video of the X10 with the agency arms trigger. Stand by.